Oh, let me come and play with you. We'll scatter music with the dew and pass o'er the mountain peak. I've heard you piping on a hill. All else I set aside. Come, let us dance the mountain peaks. We'll skip with breezes on the creeks and soar the valleys wide. Your flute has called me to the field. Now I've no place to live. Don't send me back, rejected friend. Whatever I call mine must end. All that I am I give. I hear your flute in every tree, in every flower and stream, but sweetest melody of all, a song of heaven's joy recalls. Herein my heart you see.
Yesterday, September 12th, was the anniversary of the day that Swami Kriyananda first met Paramahansa Yogananda and received from him initiation as a disciple. It was 67 years ago in Los Angeles, California. Swamiji was 22 years old. In many ways, we celebrate this anniversary, September 12th, 1948, as the founding day of Ananda, even though the first Ananda community did not begin until 20 years later. For discipleship to Paramahansa Yogananda is the defining reality of Swami Kriyananda's life and the foundation upon which Ananda is built.
In his autobiography, The Path, Swami Kriyananda writes, "There are times when a human being, though perhaps not remarkable in himself, encounters some extraordinary person or event that infuses his life with great meaning. My own life was blessed with such an encounter more than 60 years ago in 1948. Right here in America, of all lands, the epitome of bustling efficiency, material progressiveness, and pragmatic know-how, I met a great a God-known master whose constant vision was of eternity. His name was Paramhansa Yogananda. He was from India, though it would be truer to say that his home was the whole world. Had anyone suggested to me prior to that meeting that so much radiance, dynamic joy, unaffected humility, and love might be found in a single human being, I would have replied, though perhaps with a sigh of regret, that such perfection is not attainable by man. And had anyone suggested to me further that divine miracles have occurred in this scientific age, I would have laughed outright. For in those days, proud as I was in my intellectual 20th century wisdom, I mocked even the miracles of the Bible. No longer. I have seen things that make a mockery of mockery itself. I know now, from personal experience, that divine wonders do occur on earth, and I believe that the time is approaching when countless men and women will no more think of doubting God than they doubt the air they breathe. For God is not dead. It is only man who dies to all that is wonderful in life when he limits himself to worldly acquisitions and to advancing himself in worldly eyes, but overlooks those spiritual realities which are the foundation of all that he truly is.
The following readings are the words of Paramhansa Yogananda from the book The Essence of Self-Realization. All of us, before God, are but children. Life itself is a great school, and our lessons in it won't end until we've realized who we really are as children of the Infinite. The purpose of the Guru is not to weaken your will. It is to teach you secrets of developing your inner power until you can stand unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds.
The labyrinth in Greek mythology was so intricate that no one once inside it had ever been able to find his way out of it. Theseus, however, succeeded. What he did was carry a spool of twine with him and unwind it as he entered the maze. By following the string back, he found his way once more into the open. The Guru is like that length of twine. He doesn't have to be there at every turn to tell you what to do. Even mental attunement with him will suffice. You will know through your attunement whether the choices you contemplate are right for you or wrong.
If the doctor gives you a prescription, but you tear it up and toss it away, how can you expect to be cured? The Guru is your spiritual doctor. Do as he advises you. If you follow his prescription, even a little bit, your life will be transformed.
We had a young boy here who had come with his mother. Every time I tried to offer him a suggestion for his welfare, he would pout and cry, "Mama, he's scolding me." At last, I simply left him alone. Why try to help a person if he doesn't want to be helped? But remember, if I say anything that you don't like, it isn't you in your deeper reality who are being hurt. It is only that part of you which you have come here to change or to get rid of.
Yogananda taught, the company one keeps determines to a great extent whether his energy will move inward toward God or outward toward the world. Good company is essential on the spiritual path. Sir, asked a disciple, what if I'm alone? The master gazed deeply into his eyes as he replied, am I not always with you?
A few months before Paramahansa Yogananda left his body, this disciple asked him, Sir, when we can no longer see you physically, will you still be as near to us as you are now? With deep seriousness, the master replied, to those who think me near, I will be near.
Somebody sent a question in through the internet a few weeks ago. It wasn't actually directed to me, but the person who received it passed it on to see if I had any suggestions for how to answer it. It looked like a very straightforward question. It said, what evidence do you have that Yogananda is able still to help us even though he's not physically with us? And there were lots of ways that you could think about trying to answer that question. But whenever a question comes to me, I try to think not only what are the words that are being asked, but what is the person actually asking? So when we first are awakened to the spiritual path on any level, when the possibility occurs to us that life might be somewhat different than just the material side of it that we see, the question we have to ask is, what am I going to do about that? And also the question we have to ask is, how much am I willing to change? How much am I willing to risk? And what is the jeopardy if I go forward? So when a person asks the question, what is the evidence? What they're really asking is, what is my jeopardy here? What have I got to lose? How safe is this bet? So I was suggesting back that when you answer the question, you have to say, actually, there's no evidence at all in the way that you're putting it like that. If you want to take spiritual truth and prove it in the material world, you're always going to find a reason why it's not quite true. That's just the way the material world works. It repudiates the idea of a subtler reality, and it's extremely convincing. I have been driving around in Los Angeles, as one does when one is in Los Angeles. One drives around. And Los Angeles gives a very strong impression of actually being here, doesn't it? You know, it's just, you can't, when you're caught in traffic, you have to wait until the traffic moves. When you want to be someplace that you're not, you have to do whatever is required to get to that other far distant location. And all of that solidity of experience seems inescapable, doesn't it? And so does our self-identity, and so does the pains of our heart, the limitations of our desires. We experience it every day. What evidence is there that this is not what's true? And then we have this little vignette that Dharmadevi or Narayan read about this little boy who had the karma to become a resident at Mount Washington when Yogananda was living there. He was brought by his mother. The early days of Master's work were not the neat system that you see now. Master had this hotel that he had to pay for, that he had to fill. He was looking for his disciples. He advertised that there were rooms for rent. People just came and went. Adults with children who wanted to be part of it just brought their children. It was just a completely different scene than what we see right now. So there was a young boy living there who had been brought by his mother. So Master knew that no one ever crossed his path without there being a divine purpose to it. So even though this child had been physically transferred to Mount Washington by his mother and did not have the capacity himself to make a rational decision, Master thought, let me help him if I can. But every time Master tried to expand that little boy's sense of reality, now bear in mind, just because people have small bodies, it doesn't mean they have small souls. You know, sometimes we'll say that phrase, little soul, like what makes the soul little? When a girl of about 8 asked Swami Kriyananda how old he was, he had such a young consciousness, but he had such a clearly old body. You could see that she couldn't reconcile the two in a very intense way. She was a very intense girl anyway, but in a very intense way. She got real close to him and peered at him and said, "How old are you anyway?" Just couldn't figure it out. He looked back at her with just the same spirit and said, "Well, when you were an old woman, I was a little boy." And then it just somehow clicked in her mind, and she was perfectly content and went off. Because in fact, that is exactly how it works. So just because this one is a little child and you're the older person now doesn't mean there's any less experience, wisdom, divinity. It's acting itself out with the limitations of childhood, of course. But the soul is still the same. So Master's looking at this soul. Swami Kriyananda once remarked that he sees all creatures, he said, as the same. He said even animals and children and adults. He said what we all are is we are somewhere on the spectrum of consciousness between delusion and freedom. And in the house where I'm staying right now, there's 2 dogs of extremely different personalities. This gigantic Saint Bernard, whose brain looks really small, and this really small dog whose intensity for life is way outside the dog's body, and it's always just the big one lumbers around like this, and the little one goes like this. And you're just looking at individuality in a body appropriate for its level of consciousness. And what is it trying to do? It's trying to get free. Animals gradually evolve, become saints. There's amazing stories of when Ramana Maharshi, there was a cow named Lakshmi. And Ramana Maharshi was a great sage of the 1900s. He said that cow became spiritually liberated. They buried that cow in a little temple. They have a Mahasamadhi Mandir for the cow Lakshmi, because in company of Ramana Maharshi, he was able to just pull the individuality of that consciousness all the way to God realization. It's as Lahiri Mahashaya was, quote, working on a technique for liberating animals directly without having to go all through the, what are they talking about? I haven't the faintest idea. But when Swami talked about it, it's a very interesting way to look, and I don't mean to insult human beings, but we are all just somewhere between Christ consciousness and absolute total ignorance of our divinity. And what we're trying to do, every creature is trying to do the same thing. We're just trying to take down those barriers. I was thinking once we were having a conversation, a friend of mine trains dogs to help autistic people. Apparently autistic people find it easier to relate to dogs than to people because they don't talk and they don't zip from thing to thing so much. And often dogs have a very profound and positive effect. Or you have dogs who can anticipate epileptic seizures. I mean, it's amazing. And I had this sudden thought, how satisfying it must be for a dog to be able to do something useful. Because it's the same consciousness. How do we feel when we find ourselves useful and helpful to other people? It's so gratifying. It's not different for dogs, who spend most of their time just running in circles looking for food. And Dharma Devi talks about how her little dog has an extremely determined sense of its duty to protect her from all threat, which at times includes Narayan, just by its perception, but this is my job. Now, are we different? Are we really different than that? You know, we have a more dignified manner, perhaps. Some do, some don't. But we have this concept of who we are, what we're supposed to be doing, how we're supposed to be doing it, what success looks like, what failure looks like. And a great deal of that is just simply made up. I mean, we just make it up really out of whole cloth. But it's reinforced by all our conditioning and all our predetermined ideas, and this is what I'm supposed to be like, and I haven't done it, and therefore I failed. And we just run, not really different than those dogs in this little circle, looking for our toys, looking for our food, looking for our gratification. And then somehow, Yogananda describes, and the word is exquisite, the anguishing monotony of that. Isn't it so? I love that phrase, for its just poignant terribleness. The anguishing monotony of it. It's just, and that's how I felt. I remembered just before I met Swami. I really thought if I had to spend just another day just getting up in the morning, going to work, earning the money to pay for the apartment that I could come home to at night, to spend a little time with my friends so that I could go to bed, then I could get up the next morning. And I didn't have a career or anything that I was interested in. I mean, meaningful work is worth doing. or even just enjoyable work, or supporting a family, or doing it for Dharma. I'm not denigrating life. But for me, the anguishing monotony, I hadn't heard that phrase yet, that was exactly what was getting me. There has to be more than this. And there's a divine law. When the disciple is ready, the guru comes. And that doesn't just mean, like Swami Kriyananda, that you travel across the country and kneel in front of Yogananda. The guru comes to you in many forms. The guru is the power to enlighten. And so some way or another, when you want to be enlightened, and that's the key issue, then light will come. Or maybe a part of you wants to be enlightened, but the other part doesn't. Here's this little child. He has the karma to be brought all the way to Mount Washington. But whenever a God-realized master reached down to try to remove some of the veils from his consciousness, Mommy, he's scolding me. What did he do? He rushed right back. No, I want to stay just the same. I want to stay just the same. I want to stay just the same. And part of you see what we have to learn, and it's by no means easy. It's easy to talk about, but it is not easy to do. It's that we have to learn to see ourselves so completely differently that often we really can't imagine where it is that we're going. In the Festival of Light, every week we read this little cycle of this little bird, and we'll read it in a few minutes, of this little bird going through its journey. And there's the part where the bird is just pounded by life. Just wind and rain lashed at its wings. The bird, of course, is us. The more it fought back, the weaker it became. This is a very tricky part of the spiritual path, you see, because first you have to develop enough strength in yourself to define yourself differently. I mean, you walk down the streets of Los Angeles and most people are just going to their next meal or remembering their last one, or looking for their next lover or remembering their last one, looking for more money, whatever it might be. And it's just that one thing after another. We're just going to fill the shelf. Often it's not until the end of life that it occurs to them that maybe this life wasn't so well spent. And we're raised up in families that expect us to do exactly the same. It's everywhere. So something has to happen inside of us that says, no, I don't really care the majority vote, or what the magazines say, or what the internet is telling me. I know that something else is true, and there's no evidence of that except your own understanding. And no evidence will ever persuade you unless you know it already for yourself. And you're born knowing it, but that only means that you learned it at some point. Learned it by the fact that the masters took an interest in you. Maybe that little boy who hid under the chair and wouldn't let master help him, nonetheless, in some incarnation, something about the man's eyes, something about his vibration. Part of the story of Swami Kriyananda, when he first met master on that September 12th day, he went down to Encinitas, and he thought master was in Encinitas, and he knocked on the door of the hermitage, and Sister Gyanamata opened the door. Sister Gyanamata by then was an elderly woman, and she affected this sort of white nun's habit that she just designed for herself. No one in the ashram was dressed like that, but she was an older woman. She'd raised her family, she'd renounced everything, and she was going to be who she wanted to be. So you see these charming pictures of her with this sort of white thing that she was wearing. It was just her affectation, being a little younger than her, but enough in that I get it. I really understand. She needed to declare herself. So this little old lady that Kriyananda had never seen before just opens the door and was not particularly welcoming to him. He was wearing a white suit, Swami said, which is because in Palm Beach, Florida, people wore white suits in those times, 1948. So Swami thought in Los Angeles, that's how you dress. So he's dressed in this white suit. And Sister Gyanamata thought he was a serviceman who'd come to take care of the water or something like that. So he's saying, I'm here, I've arrived, I've come. I'm waiting for the master to welcome him. And she says, oh, you've come to check the water. No, I didn't come to check the water. I came to be a disciple of a great master. Really, she says. Really? Just she's not responding. Now, I think she must have recognized him. I mean, she was a great soul. She must have recognized him. But at the same time, he was not behaving appropriately. He was presumptuous. He was not respectful. He was not respecting her. He saw her as an obstacle. He wanted to get to Yogananda, and as he described it later, little old ladies crowding around churches, choking the life out of them. That was the kind of thoughts that was in his mind. And so he was up against it, so his response was to push. Now, for most of our lives, up until the time we meet someone whose wisdom we should listen to, that serves us. So that's the tricky bit on the spiritual path. When you're being told all the time by people whose lives you do not want to emulate, that you should listen to them and emulate their lives, it doesn't serve you to say, yes, mother, yes, father, yes, sir, no, sir. It serves you to say, not a chance. My parents were bemused and somewhat concerned when I first became involved with Ananda. At the age of 24 is when I gave up everything and moved. But as it endured year after year, their amusement changed to concern. And periodically over the 35 years or so that they were alive while I was involved, they would go in and out of approving on some random cycle that was clear to them. At the very end of my life, her life, my mother said to me, this was her concession. I don't know why, but I kind of like having you around. And then she sort of gazed off like this. Perhaps it has something to do with what you're doing. Like that. That was as far as it ever got. But at some random point in there, my father decided to be opposed. I'd been at Ananda 20-some years. He just, over lunch one day, they lived actually in this area I was visiting. He started to speak against it. I just looked at him. I said, first, you've got to be kidding. After all this time, you're going to take a stand like this? Do you actually think I'm going to change because of your opinion? I said, don't do this. And to his credit, he just didn't. I'm not going to become you. At this point, you're out of your mind. I remember once, just as a small thing, I became very ill. I came to visit for a few days. I just finished a huge project at Ananda. I think it was the publishing of The Path, if I'm not mistaken. I came to visit my parents just for a couple of days, and I got really sick. I rarely get sick like that. It's one of the few times I got a very high fever, and I had to stay there about 5 or 6 days, just curled up, in this feverish state. When I didn't eat, which always alarms a mother. She pleaded with me to eat, so I conceded, and I remember I ate one strawberry, which just seemed to me like this huge concession to her concern, which gives me an idea of how sick I was. But then, when I was beginning to recover, we were lined up on the couch, as families do, watching television, like this. And I felt like this string tying me from, my family lived in Claremont. This string going from Claremont to Ananda Village like this, and this was like my connection. And there were all these demons, and they were bouncing on it. They were trying to break it. They were bouncing on it. And I felt this thought arise in me to say to my parents, I think I won't go back to Ananda. I think I'll just stay here with you until I can get a job in my own apartment. And I could feel how they would cheer. Wow, that's wonderful, honey. We're so glad to have you home with us, like this. And at the same time, I could feel what a, explosion there'd be at Ananda Village. What? You're not coming back? You're going to live in Claremont and get a job? On one side, my parents would think it was great. On this side, oh, my Gurubhais would probably come down en masse to see if I'd lost my mind, to reverse it. Did they feed, did you drink the Kool-Aid in your parents' house? What happened to you?
Your parents were Jewish.
My parents were Jewish. Jewish was a little part of it. It would go in and out. At some point, my mother seemed to discover Jesus And she accused me of becoming a Christian after like 10 years. Mom, I've always been a Christian. No, she thought it had just happened. Didn't really matter. But so what I was talking about is then comes a point, and I'll go back to Swami. Sister Gyanamata was thwarting Swami, and he was not accustomed to being thwarted. And that was to his credit. He was not accustomed to being thwarted, but she had more power than he did. And so finally she conceded, well, he could go to Los Angeles, and that's where Yogananda was, in Hollywood. So Swami's on the bus, on the way to Hollywood to meet Master. And all of a sudden, as Swamiji put it, he saw Gyanamata's eyes in his mind. And he in his consciousness, he looked into those eyes, and he realized this was no ordinary old lady, that there was something in those eyes that set her apart completely. Now you see, he had the humility, the wisdom, the good karma, and you know what he received? He received evidence. But that evidence was based on the receptivity of his heart. And then inwardly, he said, I'm sorry, I misjudged you. And then Swami writes, he said, in that moment he knew he would be accepted as a disciple. That was the test, which is, yes, your ego and your personal power has served you up until now, but now we're moving into an entirely new reality. And that reality is the reality of a disciple. And a disciple is by no means mindless. Swamiji said, I accepted everything Master told me, Swamiji said, but not unquestioningly. You see the difference? You can ask questions in two ways. You can ask questions, well, why would you say that? Or you can ask questions, why would you say that? And Swami Kriyananda was extremely impressive in this respect. He never tried to persuade anyone. He was passionate. Passionate doesn't begin to describe the commitment he had toward helping people spiritually. Every day of his life, literally, no matter what condition he was in. He talks about being in the hospital in Gurgaon with pneumonia in both his lungs, nearly unconscious, hardly able to breathe. And the doctor comes into his room, and Swami's just lying there, and the doctor starts describing to him the dilemma of how to be dharmic in a corrupt society and like this, and asks Swamiji to help him. Swami said, I was hardly an example of the power of yoga at that moment. But Swami did his best, just through it all, to try to explain it to him. Swami talks about being taken to the hospital in an ambulance when his hip was dislocated in Hawaii, and this long drama. And he says, and the ambulance driver and I had an interesting discussion about the philosophy of life. Just like there was never a moment when he wasn't absolutely willing. But he never tried to persuade. He never argued. He never tried to prove to you if you didn't want to know. And you see, that's our part as a disciple, is that we justifiably are who we are, and we have a right to claim it. It takes a great deal to get to the point where we notice that Sister Gyanamata's eyes are different than the average old lady's eyes. But then we have to use all that willpower and all that personal power to ask God, what is true and what are you trying to do with me? And we can't solve the problems in the same way. It's like once we become a devotee, I can organize my life and make it work and do it myself. It's a strange thing. Once you make that commitment to let Master help you, to let your Guru help you, to let God help you, he doesn't let you run your same old systems anymore. And one has to understand that is not a failure, that's a progression. I myself recently God took, as I often say, an unwelcome interest in my liberation. Decided to break me of certain attachments I preferred not to have broken. But I wasn't given a choice in the matter. So I was asked to break attachments that I wanted to keep until I died. I thought death would be soon enough, but God didn't think so. And no power on earth of my own will, and I'm not a weakling. And no power on earth, I couldn't break those attachments myself. But all the energy that you have inside yourself, what you use it for, is not to fix your own life, but in a very peculiar way, to hold yourself steady while the storm rages around you, and to not lose the connection with the thought of, I don't know what you're doing, I definitely do not like what you're doing, but if this is what you're giving me, I'll just put one foot in front of the other until you do something else with me. And in a very strange way, that you see, that takes much more strength than it does just to fix it yourself, as we've always done. And then this weird thing that I can only call the grace of God happens. And every spiritual person speaks of it. I actually was told about it. It was interesting. I was told about it by someone in AA who said that every addict has the moment when the addiction is taken away. And so it's what she said. That's not a life I know. She said it for herself. You're absolutely at the end of your rope, and then God takes mercy on you and recognizes that you are. We were laughing yesterday that the song Home is a Green Hill, which you all know, which many of you know, we sang it yesterday. Home is the end of the fray. And suddenly we heard that word fray in a different way. Like absolutely the rope is completely frayed out. Home is the end of your rope. It's really how it came out. But there's actually a lot of truth in that, isn't there? I was reading the little book, it's called The Imitation of Christ. It's very famous. Written some centuries ago by a monk about how to live. And he talks about in there, even the greatest of spiritual people are constantly tempted and constantly find themselves unable by their own unaided willpower to put their lives in order. And it happens even to the greatest of saints, because we have this strange business about all these tests that keep happening, even to great souls. And he writes, that's a constant reminder to us so that we never forget where our own capacities end and God steps in to take care of us. But the thing about discipleship, which is exactly paradoxical to what everybody believes. I've had so many people who are just starting on the path. I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. I should be able to take care of my own life. I don't need anyone to help me like that. Wait just a moment, the thought slipped out of my head. Oh, yes. And so I'm not going to take a guru, and I just say, look, no such luck. Nobody's going to take over your life, and nobody's going to tell you what to do. If you ask a sincere question, you may get an answer. If you offer yourself with sincere humility, you may find an influx of power that you know without a doubt is not your own. And at the same time, it wouldn't come if you're just passive and are doing nothing. But when it actually comes in this strange way, you just know it's not you. What is the evidence? Oh, there is none. The only evidence is you just know it's not you. And when it happens over and over again, then you don't have to ask the question anymore. You know, spiritual life cannot be organized like mathematical tables. Swami even said once, there's no such thing as statistics. There was a statistic that came out. I didn't watch it because it wasn't relevant, but I heard about it, that a woman over 35 was more likely to be killed by a terrorist than to remarry again, or some awful thing like that. This was a couple of years ago, maybe 20 years ago. Everybody was freaking out all over the place, you know, because a lot of women over 35 wanted to marry, and they didn't want to be killed by terrorists. But Swami's remark to that was very simple. There is no such thing as statistics. There's only individual karma. There's no such thing. You can't quantify this, because every soul is unique in the eyes of God, and in a way that you can't believe until you experience, individually loved. And how do we experience it? We want to. Really. It's all in our hands. And even if we can't want with everything we have, we can want to want with everything we have. We have a chant, I want only thee, Lord. And I feel sometimes I don't always want to sing that. Not myself, but I don't always want to impose that on others. And I read where Swami himself commented, you can't really sing it to the rhythm, but you can say, I want to want only thee, Lord. I want to want only thee. But that's enough. Because that's huge. To even have that little bit of a breakthrough. Cling to that, friends. Let everything else go. Because in the end, everything else will go. I was just recently told that before Wayne Dyer died, toward the end of his life, he cut holes in his pockets so that he knew that everything would just fall out and he couldn't take any of it with him. I just was so charmed by that. You know, we should at least have one pocket that's full of holes so that we start to put stuff in it. We realize, oh, it's just going to be lost anyway. Ego, possessions, importance, but it's all returned in the form that we're really seeking, which is this is just nothing in our hands, bliss, true security, real relationship with God. Fill your heart and your pockets with that, and it'll always be with you. God bless you.